If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
A big thank you to our sponsor, Avalara. Avalara's award-winning tax automation solutions help accounting practitioners and businesses of all sizes simplify sales tax compliance with real-time rates, automated return filing, and more. Listen for a special offer later in the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast, but instead of murderers, ours features employees who embezzle tens of thousands of dollars, but every now and then we get lucky and we also get a murderer. Hello, I'm Greg Kite.
And I am one of America's most wanted. Greg, it's good to be back with you.
Most wanted friends. That's my friend Caleb Newquist.
That's sweet of you to say.
To launch into it, here's a question I got to you to kind of set us up for today's case. Is first off, Caleb, about how many jobs have you had in your entire life so far?
Well, point of clarification here. Let's define job. Are we talking like employers? Do volunteer jobs count? Or things and activities, some illegal, some possibly illegal, that made me money? Like I need some parameters to work with here.
Well, I mean, okay, so that totally sparks my interest. I want to know about all of the possibly illegal ways that you've made money, but specifically what I'm talking about is like employer, like W-2 generating jobs.
Okay, W-2 generating jobs.
Yeah,
it's more
where you are an employee.
Yeah, so probably close to 15. What about you? How many?
Okay. I counted them up, and if I'm remembering everything correctly, I've had 15, which seems like more than what I would have thought. Like if I was going to guess, I would have said less than 10. But so follow-up question, how many of those jobs that you have of your about 15, because we're about the same, about 15 jobs we both have. How many, do you remember any of those jobs running background checks on you, and how many do you remember having a background check on?
I mean, I don't explicitly remember having background checks run, but I'm almost certain that virtually every job I've had as an adult probably involved a background check. I did have this one. Yeah, probably. I mean, I just don't know, you know?
Yeah.
I do have the most memorable kind of related thing was I did have to take 2 drug tests to be on site at a large international investment bank when I was working as a big auditor. That's urine and hair, for those wondering, the urine and hair.
Okay.
And I think I may have gotten some low-level security clearance at some point. I don't know. I did some government jobs, so I think I had some security clearance at some point, but that expires pretty quick. And I mean, they definitely do the full Monty on those kinds of things. But yeah, like explicitly, I don't really remember. What about you? Lots of background checks? I think. And how would I remember? I don't know. How would you remember?
I swear that you have to be informed if an employer is running a background check on you. I don't think they can just sneaky run a background check on you. And part of my belief in that is you may not know this about your co-host, Greg Kite, but he is currently a registered, certified notary for the great state of Utah in the United States of America. It's a responsibility that's been delegated to me by the lieutenant governor of the state of Utah, which, I mean, pretty big time. Pretty big. I was gonna
say it's a big responsibility being a notary.
And no,
I just had some stuff notarized the other day.
I have been a notary for 3 commission terms, and I just started my 3rd commission term, and I had to specifically say I was okay with them running a background check on me, and they wouldn't run the background check until I told them. However, they also, and I think this is also the case with employers, they have at least in Utah, they have no responsibility to inform you of the results of their background check. So that's my understanding of the dance is they have to inform you that they're running one. You have to have some kind of consent for them to do that. But then after that, it's all just whatever. It's behind a curtain. I used to be a public school teacher in a past life, and I'm confident that they ran a background check for me then because I had to get fingerprinted to be a school teacher. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to take my prints if they don't run a background check on me as well. That would seem a little strange. And
why do they need wait, whoa. Hold the phone there. Why do they need your fingerprints?
Because school teachers are the most likely makers of meth. I don't know if have you ever watched a TV show? So I think it's to track down meth deal. That's my guess. I didn't
That's
ask.
Only after that was only after 2006 though, right?
Yeah.
So if I read your comment correctly, you approximate about 20% of the jobs you've had background checks. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I'd say it's probably around then 20 to 30% of them. So here's some interesting stats. According to the ACFE, who and we look at their stats a lot when we're doing this. They produce their biannual report to the nations on occupational fraud, and they say that that's barely over 50% of all organizations run background checks on employees at all, which again is interesting because I'm thinking it was only about 20% of my employers who did it. And of those that did run background checks, 13% of them revealed some kind of red flag, but the organization went ahead and hired those people anyways. So some interesting stats there.
That's like 1 in 8 employers. So you're saying to me that all the employers that run background checks and then find a red flag, of those, approximately 1 in 8 of them still hire the person. I'm just wondering that, but I mean, let me ask your opinion about as someone so knowledgeable about fraud. I mean, that seems is that high? That seems high. 1 in 8, like roughly 13%. That seems kind of high.
Right. And again, one of the things that does become difficult when we are really trying to dig into the ACFE stats is that they don't give a whole lot of like color commentary to them. And so when they say 13% of background checks revealed some kind of red flag, I don't necessarily mean that what that means is that someone had a minor in possession of alcohol charge 15 years prior. I do think that what that means, well, actually, I know I do, because when you do break this down, the 13%, they do disaggregate that, and they say that there's 4% of those people who were charged with a fraud-related crime and 9% of those people who were charged but not convicted of some fraud-related crime. So those are the kind of red flags that we're talking about, and that the organization still went ahead and hired those people regardless of that being in their background. There's definitely jobs that have less likelihood of committing fraud. I know that accountants are the most likely department to commit fraud, but only 17% of frauds are committed by people who are in the accounting department. So that means there's still 83% of frauds that are committed by the janitors, because those are the only two departments that are in any organization, is accounting and cleaning and maintenance. So I'm just saying, there's a lot of janitors who are stealing a whole lot of mop heads, and you got to be careful of that because that's going to affect your bottom line. Now, listener, when we come back from the break, we're going to tell you about a crazy $200,000-ish embezzlement scheme, and the whole damn thing could have been prevented with a simple background check.
Avalara helps businesses of all sizes get indirect tax compliance right. Our sales tax solutions help you manage sales and use tax complexities while lessening risk for your business and clients. Whether you are a small business or a global enterprise, Avalara can help you deliver tax compliance services confidently and efficiently. Over 30,000 organizations across the globe use Avalara's cloud-based compliance solutions to solve transaction tax compliance needs, including sales and use, VAT, and other indirect and direct taxes. In October 2021, IDC MarketScape named Avalara a leader in tax automation in 3 categories: small and mid-sized business, enterprise, and VAT. If you're considering tax automation, check out the independent IDC evaluations at omf.show/Avalara. And later, we'll be telling you about a special offer for anyone who wants to learn more.
In this episode, we're going to tell the story of James Rupard, a guy who stole $200,000 from not one, but two different volunteer firefighter organizations and some very vulnerable individuals as well. And there's a special place in hell for a guy who steals from first responders, but there's an even more special place in hell for this guy. And we're going to get to all the reasons why. But first, we're going to unpack this story just a little bit. So, Caleb, James Rupard, the story starts, actually, where we're going to start the story is in Scotland County, North Carolina in the mid-1990s.
Whoa, where is Scotland County, Greg? Do you have any idea where Scotland County, North Carolina is?
No one knows where Scotland County, North Carolina is because it's that rural and and the population density is near zero. For all of Scotland County, for the 2019 census, the whole county had less than 35,000 residents. Its biggest city was Laurenburg, that had over 15,000 people in that. So that was, close to half of the entire population of the whole county.
Let me just point this out, and I've mentioned this on previous episodes, but I come from a small town. The county where I come from probably has a population density smaller than this.
Really?
Somebody can fact check me if they want. Valley County, Nebraska, go ahead, knock yourselves out. But I love a small town. I love a small town fraud, Greg. That's what I'm trying to say. So,
and that's exactly what this is. And I think the small, some of the dynamics in a small town actually helped this guy perpetrate this fraud. James Rupard, he moved to Scotland County, which again is in eastern North Carolina. Prior to that, he lived in the far west end of North Carolina, and he moved there in the mid-1990s. And this guy, so listen to this character that we have. Everybody loved this guy. He was a volunteer with the Stewartsville Volunteer Fire Department, one of the organizations that he ended up defrauding. He also was a volunteer at the Scotland County Firefighters Association. He volunteered for the American Red Cross and for the Republican Party. This guy was just volunteer of volunteers. He also was the pastor of the Sandhills Community Church, and he was a licensed insurance agent. And he created a company called American Insurance Marketing, and so he did his insurance agent stuff through his own insurance business. And one of the things that I read in the different research that I did on this case was that there was a lot of people in Scotland County who described James Rupard, old Jimmy Rupard, as being one of the nicest people you would ever meet. That he was a beloved figure in this small community. Yeah. And again, I think that's one of the things that if you ingratiate yourself to a small community, you earn the people's trust, and then you can fleece them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he is definitely ingratiated. I mean, yeah. Just based on the volunteer work and then having a business and then spending your Sundays doing that thing. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Seems a little like a busybody and to prey on some small town folk.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because you kind of wonder which, what was the cart and what was the horse? Because I know he's got his business of his insurance company, and I could see a lot of people going, hey, if I really want to make my insurance company really work, I need to network with people. Oh, is there a way that I could be a pastor of a church? That's a great way to network with people, and then I can sell more insurance doing that. Or was it the other way around, where his main thing was pastoring, and because he was a pastor of this church, he was like, hey, I'm going to be, that's just where his heart was. And I'm going to start volunteering for these organizations because I'm a giver, is what I am. And the insurance thing is just to pay the bills so I can do this other stuff that's more meaningful to me. It's hard. It's that's the sort of stuff that we don't know, which was the cart and which was the horse on that.
But yeah, I see what you're saying, because
people are fascinated with stories of hypocrisy, is what it is.
Yes.
And I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter what the hypocrisy is. If you're wherever you're at, if you're being a hypocrite, that's always fascinating to people, because you're saying one thing and you're doing another thing.
Yeah, it's a double life.
Yeah. And again, in my research, I found there are many entire websites that are devoted to clergy that have committed crimes. I think one of them was clergiesgonewild.com. So yeah, go check that out.
Nice domain. You nailed that one.
Yeah, it is.
Somebody.
It is.
Well done.
Right. So here's what started happening. So he came into this community in the mid 1990s, and he immediately started doing all this volunteer work. All that stuff was almost right from the get-go, from when he entered this community. But then in 2000, Rupert, he opened a secret checking account in the name of the Stewartville Volunteer Fire Department, and he did so by forging the signatures of the fire department's treasurer and secretary at the bank. So that was in the year 2000. And then it was a year later, in November of 2001, when he convinced the board of directors of the Stewartville Volunteer Fire Department to move a $10,000 certificate of deposit from their normal bank to the new bank where he opened the secret account. And he had said that, hey, this new bank has better rates than the bank that we're at right now. And so this is one of the weird things about this. It's very complex, and I don't feel like James Rupert was some kind of financial genius. I think he was just making it up as he went along, and he just sort of fell into a very complex system. So they transferred the $10,000 CD to the new bank, and then he transferred it from the CD into the secret account that he had opened earlier. And then from the beginning of 2002 to near the end of 2003, he transferred all of that money out of the secret account into his own personal accounts and other accounts that he controlled. Does that kind of make sense?
I mean, it does, and yet it doesn't. I think that's, like you say, there's something that sounds kind of needlessly complex about this particular type of fraud. Like we're not here to do a compare and a contrast and say who's good at fraud and who's not good at fraud. But when you think about the Rita Crundwell approach, it was very simple. Like it was, and I mean, she did a lot of work to cover things up, and like all these new accounts and all this transferring and things, like it just feels a bit messy. And like you say, it kind of gives you the impression that he was kind of just, I don't know, just winging it in a way.
Yeah.
So pretty weird.
Yep. He faked his way.
Weird.
He faked his way through this entire fraud. And this entire fraud that lasted, well, which is funny, because is he a good fraud perp, or is he a bad fraud perp? He's definitely a great fraud perpetrator, because he made it onto the world's premier fraud podcast, Oh My Fraud. So that's the best indication. And he was able to carry this thing out for over 8 years, which is a crazy long time, because again, according to the ACFE, in their most recent report to the nations, the median duration of a fraud was a mere 14 months, and this guy did 8 years. So I'm going to say he stumbled and faked his way through it, and the complexity was one of the things that helped him get away with it. Even though I don't think he knew what he was doing, I think that his needless complexity was part of what helped hide the fraud. I also believe that, like we said before, the small town vibe and the fact that this guy was out volunteering everywhere was how he could get away with forging the signatures of the people on the board of directors for the fire department. Because you go to a bank, you're the pastor of the church, you say, hey, here's the thing, I got the signatures from the people, and they go, right on, Pastor Rupert, we'll open that account right away. And and I think that's how that happened.
Greg, I know that our Reverend Rupert stole over 200K. So it started off with sounds like it started off with 10 grand. So what else?
Yeah.
What else?
10,000.
What's some of the other stealing he did?
I'll get to that. And first off, realize that was actually more than $10,000 because it was a CD plus the interest that had accrued on the CD. So it ended up being closer to $12,000 when he got his hands on it and got it out of there. Then the next step in this whole thing was in mid 2003. Because again, the guy's he's an insurance salesman. He accepted $7,500 from the Scotland Firefighters Association to invest in an annuity. And instead of investing it in the annuity, he just said he took the money and didn't do anything with it at all. But one of the things that he would do is he would just create fake statements. And this is very common for fraudsters, is that he's in a position of authority in a fiduciary role with the organization that he's defrauding. And so when it's time to say, and when they go, hey, Jimmy, how's that annuity doing? And he goes, it's doing great. Let me get you your statement. And then they just go make up a statement on Word and print it out and hand it in and go, here you go. And they go, awesome. That looks like it's doing great for us. So that was the next $7,500. It starts getting bigger than that in October 2003. So later in 2003, he at this point had become the captain of the Stewartsville Volunteer Fire Department. And the fire department received $163,000 worth of grant money from FEMA to purchase firefighting equipment, and $38,000 of that, as the captain of the Stewartsville Volunteer Fire Department, he decided to steal. So he showed some restraint, I think. Yeah. Well, and again, he kind of did, because I don't know. Maybe I'm going to just blow my wad with this guy right now. But when he was on trial, he said that he never intended to steal anything ever. He justified the entire fraud by saying he intended to take the money temporarily and to pay it all back in full. So I think that's why he didn't take the whole $163,000. He just took the $38,000. I think that's why it took him over a year and a half to bleed out the first $10,000 that he stole from the fire department, because I think it was like, I can, it's there. I think I can pull this out, but I'm going to put it back in as soon as I make the money back. I think that part of his plan. Again, I don't think he was a smart dude. I don't think he was a financial genius. Yeah. It's weird that I think in a lot of frauds, the idea that you hear this explanation all the time, right? Where people are just like, well, I wasn't really stealing it. I was just borrowing it. Right. And I had fully intended it to pay it back. But the thing is, in order to pay the money back, that either involves an unexpected inheritance, robbing a bank, or a money bag falling from the sky and landing on your fucking head. Like, I just don't know, like, the logic, how the people think it through. There's like, well, eventually the 75,000 will show up on my doorstep, and then I'll make good on it all. And it just doesn't. I don't know. It's a very weird phenomenon in the fraud logic. Right. Well, and I think it's one of those things where these people are trying to, because again, if you look at a lot of the research on ethics, is what people are trying to do when they make unethical decisions, rationalizing those unethical decisions, is they're trying to create a narrative whereby they're still a good guy. And so his narrative was, I'm not stealing this. I just need it right now to get me out of a pinch, but I'm going to pay this back. And then you can continue the fantasy. And I could see, and again, this is 100% speculation, but I could see this with him owning his own business, is he could say, this time I just borrowed $38,000 from a FEMA grant. And then you go, okay, how many annuities do I not need to sell to get a commission to get $38,000 back? Oh, it's this many. Oh, I think I can swing that. And then you go, okay. And then you go, cool. And then you don't ever think about it again, because you sell zero annuities. You sold zero. Exactly. But he could have sold more. Yeah, exactly. So then just to burn through some of these other things. In 2006, he stole another $7,700 from the fire department. In 2007, which at this point he was the president. So he at one point he was the chief of the volunteer fire department. Now he is the president of the Firefighters Association, where he stole $13,000 from the association. And then
just failing upward. I love it. Just failing upward.
Right, exactly. He's moving on up as he commits these crimes. And then in 2007, and this was very interesting, in 2007, he stepped down as the treasurer of the volunteer fire department. So he was the chief. Mm-hmm. He probably was doing both duties where he was the chief and the treasurer. Nobody ever really broke down the timeline of when he had what hat on for this organization. But again, small town volunteer department, chances are he wore multiple hats at any given time. But before he stepped down as the treasurer, which I think that's interesting, period, that he would step down. Because I would think with what he was doing, he would say, I'll be damned before I stop volunteering as the treasurer of this volunteer fire department to just make sure nobody ever caught him. But what he did instead, and again, this seems smart, is that he opened a new, not secret checking account at the same bank where he had the secret checking account. He transferred $15,000 to the new account, and he totally closed the old account, which prevented the new treasurer from seeing any of the fraudulent bank account history that it had there. Because again, he was the only person who was able to get, who was on the secret account. That's how he was able to transition out of treasurer and not be immediately discovered for what he did. But then the very next year, the guy makes the dumbest mistake that he's ever done, where they get another grant to go buy some equipment, and I guess they go and actually do purchase some equipment, and then right after that he goes to the treasurer of the fire department who succeeded him, and he goes and says, "Hey, we just bought all this equipment. I need a check from you for $26,121 because that equipment that we bought, I bought it on just out of my business's checking account. So I just need a quick reimbursement from the department. You're welcome that I did that for you." So, but again, this guy was beloved and he was trusted, and so the new treasurer was like, "Well, that's a really that's bad business to do. Bad business for the fire department, bad business for your insurance company. That's sloppy. But here you go. Here's your check for $26,121. Go ahead and take that. But while you go to the bank and cash that check and then immediately spend it on scratchers, while you're doing that, I'm just gonna do a little digging." And at that point, they were like, "Oh shit, this guy has stolen lots of money from us over the years." And at that time, the new assistant fire chief for the volunteer fire department had learned that Jimmy Rupert, that his business phone had been disconnected, and that he just, which is kind of like going, oh, something's going bad with his business because his business phone. If you have a business, you kind of need a phone for that business. That's sort of, a basic office expense you got to have.
Hopefully people can call you so they can give you money.
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
legitimate way.
And so I do think that's a red flag that maybe Jimmy Rupert's business isn't going awesome, is if the business phone is disconnected. And then they also just heard tell in their small town that Rupert was in serious debt, which he absolutely was. And so the assistant chief went to the bank. He asked for all of the fire department's bank records, and that's when he was able to become apprised even of the secret bank account. Because remember, that bank account was opened in the name of the fire department, even though Rupert was the only guy who had authority over it. So they gave them the records at that point, and then they were able to see all the checks that Rupert had written, and he had written, and the money he took out, he didn't just send it, give it to himself personally. Some of it went to his business, some of it went to other accounts that he controlled, some of it went to his wife, who then shortly after this became his ex-wife, and that's sort of the how this story unfolded. I mean, going back to just how everybody loves a good hypocrisy story. One of the things that's awesome about this that came out is that of the, and again, the tallies are different for how much money this guy stole. And part of it is because how much did he allege to steal? At one point, he was accused of stealing over $300,000 initially. And then most of the banner headlines for the story say that he stole $200,000. But then his restitution that he was ordered to pay was about in the order of $140,000. So none of that stuff quite lines up. And it's very difficult to find an accounting that ties out exactly what his restitution was for and how that ties out to the monies that he pulled out from this. But one of the things that came to light during this guy's trial is that of the ill-gotten gains that Jim Rupert got, he did spend $2,600 of that stolen money to pay for divinity school tuition because he's a pastor, and you got to keep your your Bible school chops sharp, because those sermons aren't going to preach themselves.
Yeah, thou shalt not steal. I'm sure it was, I think.
Right. That was next semester after this one. He hadn't quite gotten to that.
They got to the 10 Commandments. That he skipped that semester where they talked about the 10 Commandments, I guess.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what year this divinity school tuition came due, but $2,600 doesn't seem like a lot of money to be learning about God, to become a man of the cloth.
Yeah, that's definitely in-state divinity school tuition. But that's not the crazy part. Do you want to know
there's a crazy part?
There's a bombshell that also came up during this investigation. The crazy part is that what came out during this trial is that Jim Rupert not only stole all this money from fire departments, but from 1979 to 1994, James Rupert served a prison sentence for the shooting murders of his grandparents who raised him from childhood, from infancy. This dude, did you hear that? This dude was a convicted murderer, not just for murdering like someone who did him wrong. He murdered his grandparents who raised him from infancy after his father died in a car accident. That's the Jim Rupert that these guys put in charge of their money and of their fire department.
Did you know that 52% of accounting practitioners, large and small, still rely on spreadsheets and manual processes for sales tax compliance? Why not move your accounting practice to the 21st century using Avalara for Accountants? The Avalara for Accountants compliance automation platform helps accounting service providers grow their client base with sales tax prep and filing, business license management, and more. Avalara Managed Returns for Accountants was recognized as a best product in 2021 through CPA Practice Advisors Technology Innovation Awards. Want to learn more? Later, we will tell you about a special offer. All right, so two things come to mind. Number one, I thought there was going to be a dramatic pause there. And then number two, maybe his grandparents were jerks. I know it doesn't I had very sweet grandparents. I don't know about you, Greg.
Oh
my grandparents were very sweet people. And so, but I had some friends.
Those grandparents who got murdered had it coming.
Look, we're going to get into it. And so, it's crazy that someone would kill their grandparents.
It's not.
They could have had it coming. They could have had it coming.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say they didn't. Just going out on a limb, saying that they didn't, and that James Rupert was a bad person. That's where I'm. That's where I'm going with this. So here's the story. Here's the story. If you'd like to read it for yourself, there's a link to an article in the show notes. But what they said is that Jim Rupert was 17 years old. He was living with his grandparents because they were raising him. And sometime in the wee hours of the morning, there's some construction workers who are working right near his grandparents' house, and they see Grandpa Rupert running out of the house in his bathrobe. They see Jim Rupert running out behind him with a shotgun. Grandpa Rupert turns around to be like, don't you shoot me with that shotgun. And at that point, Jim Rupert shoots him with the shotgun is what he does. And then he chucks the shotgun and he chucks a 22 pistol into a lake because that's what murderers do. And then he goes to a neighbor's house and goes, oh my gosh, the craziest thing just happened. Somebody shot my grandparents, failing to say that it was him that shot his grandparents. The police came to the neighbor's house, and obviously, as police do, they initially question him right there, where he admits to the murder of his grandparents. And they said, why did you shoot your grandparents? And he said that they were too strict and they were making him go back to school, and he hated school because apparently they weren't sending him to divinity school. And Rupert told them about the guns in the pond, and so the police went to the pond. They found the rifle, they found the 22, and this is where it gets a little heavy. If murder of grandparents wasn't already heavy, but they did find later that the grandpa was shot twice with the rifle, and that the grandma had been shot 5 times with the pistol. So yikes. Yeah.
Grizzly.
So that all happened in 1978 when he was 17. And apparently the jury, it was just open and closed. And he changed his story during the case where he said he didn't do it. And he had like amnesia, and like he just totally couldn't remember anything until all of a sudden he started remembering that he had guns in his hands. And it's like, okay, that doesn't help you convince people you didn't murder people if you're like, I can't remember anything, but when I came to, I had guns in my hand and murder in my eyes. And that's his defense. I don't know how that works. The jury they deliberated for about 3 seconds and were like, yeah, you're guilty. And you go, and he was given 2 life sentences for the murders of his grandparents. Yeah, that was the original sentence, but then he appealed it, and on appeal, they were like, oh, you're only 17. You're just a kid. We can't give you a double life sentence because you're just 17, and everybody knows 17-year-olds are babies. And so they changed it to a 15-year sentence for shooting both of his grandparents. So that's the James Rupert that we're dealing with right here. And again, that leads back to the entire conversation we had about background checks. I'm going to say, if these organizations did a background check on James Rupert, who ostensibly moved from Western North Carolina, where he murdered his grandparents, to Eastern North Carolina, where nobody knew that he murdered his grandparents. That's why he moved, was to start on a clean slate and to be like under the radar with what he had done that was so heinous. And so he started a new thing over here. I'm going to say, if the church, or if the volunteer fire department or the firefighters association, if any of them had done a background check on him and found out that he was a convicted murderer of his grandparents, they probably would have found another candidate for all of those positions. Your hot take on that, Caleb Newquist?
Well, he clearly didn't have Atticus Finch as an attorney, but barring that, if you run an organization and you run a background check on someone, and they did 15 years for murder, even if you are a very forgiving and understanding person, you probably have some questions, Yeah. There'd be a discussion at least.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably.
I think so.
Yeah.
And
so it's not unreasonable. I'm not saying it's an unreasonable thing. And I'm not saying, and you're saying they would probably go with somebody else, but also if this person, he gets into a community and he's very affable and he's like you say, he's ingratiating himself. Yeah. I think even if it had come up after the fact, there's a lot of speculation going on here. So I don't know if this is what we should be doing. Yeah. But you could say, small town.
We absolutely. This is our podcast. We get to speculate ad nauseum.
Okay.
But I like the disclaimer. This is all. This is all us on our brains.
But this is all in our brains. But what I'm saying is, if a guy like that, even if it were to come to light, right?
Uh-huh.
You think in a small town where he's really become part of the community, people are just like, well, shucks, Jim, you didn't tell us about murdering your grandparents. He's like,
Yeah.
well, can you blame me? And people are like, nope, seems pretty understandable. You'd want to get a fresh start, et cetera, et cetera. And he could carry on with the financial shenanigans and no one would be to the wiser. I guess what I'm saying is, I think we end up in this. I think we end up in the same place, right?
You mean with him, if he had been transparent with that, or if the background check had brought that up, that people would have been like, oh, I guess people murder grandparents from time to time, and so you're good. Go ahead and continue to run our fire department and our church in our small family values rural community.
Maybe.
I mean, come on, who hasn't murdered a grandparent? We all have 4 of them.
Maybe I'm way off base here, but
I'm confident. I'm confident that he would have been shit canned immediately if that came to light after the fact, and if that was known before he was given any of these positions. There's no way anyone would have given him any job except possibly a janitor at the Sandhills Community Church, and that would be it. And this is my stereotype of small rural town America. They're going to say, oh, we can't have a murderer as our pastor or as our fire department chief. So that would have shut it down.
I could see that as a possibility. What I'm wondering is, though, while we are kind of speculating and armchair psychoanalyzing here.
Right.
What's interesting, and there isn't a lot, maybe you found it in your research, but like there's no indication that Rupert was, it's not clear as to the motive. Like money troubles, yes, but there seems to be even like a psychological thing going on here where he like, because, and I don't think we mentioned it, but but he also stole money from his mother-in-law. He stole money from a widow. Right. He stole a couple's life savings. His friend who bailed him out.
Yeah.
He forged one of his friend who bailed him out. He forged the guy's check. So like
we got to tell that story real quick before we get into that. So real quick, more of the timeline. Rupert was arrested in September 2009. He was indicted in November 2011. There was, a bond that he could do a bail bond to get released and wait for his court hearing. In March of 2015, he pleaded guilty to 17 felonies and was sentenced. But after his arrest, he has this friend, Randy Blackburn, who bonded him out of jail. And this friend of his, Randy, was the guy you were talking about, who was like, he looked past Rupert's past indiscretions, and he was like, I'm going to help you because you're a friend. And so not only did Blackburn bail him out of jail, he also allowed Rupert to live with him while he was awaiting his trial and while he was this persona non grata in the community. And this guy, like everyone else, was just pissed and wanted to string the guy up. But this guy was the only one who stood by him throughout this whole thing. But Rupert, while he was living in Randy Blackburn's house, he stole one of Randy Blackburn's checks and issued it to himself and forged Blackburn's signature to take the money. Obviously, at which point Randy was like, what the hell are you doing, you son of a bitch? Kicked him out of his house. And then he lost his last friend in Scotland County, North Carolina. So, So something is like, all this indicates to me is that it's almost like he couldn't help himself. Like the one person who is really walking in the path of Christ here, Reverend, is your pal Randy. Yeah. Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I hear
like he's the one.
Amen, Brother Newquist.
I went to plenty of Sunday school. That's not the point. The point is this person who is helping his friend in a time of need, and his friend completely betrays him. And it's like there seems to be an uncontrollable urge that he cannot help himself from. Right. If the opportunity presents himself for stealing, in this case, he was going to steal. And that's the part that I have. That's the part that I just like can't get my head around, is like,
Right.
It's so kind of brazen and sloppy that it just doesn't. It kind of defies comprehension. And so,
Yeah.
in any case, it's a sad story. Also, is what I'm trying to say. It's easy. It's easy to be mad at people, but also you're just like, what is going on? You know?
Right. Right. Yeah. No. I hear you. You know, and you kind of wonder if it's kind of like a kleptomania sort of situation where the guy, if there's money, he's gonna steal it. So yeah, I 100% hear what you're saying. Absolutely. So so again, just to kind of give some of the last little details about this fraud, it is basically just the sentencing. So like I said, he pleaded guilty to 17 felonies, which interestingly enough, the maximum sentence for all of those 17 felonies was a little over 41 years in prison. But Rupert was sentenced to 4 years and 10 months in prison, plus 6 months of house arrest. And when the sentencing came out, he'd already been in jail for 40 months. So he only had 18 months left. Yeah, because time already served. So he only had 18 months after he was actually sentenced, plus those 6 months of house arrest. Plus he was on probation because he also was required to pay back $140,000 of restitution. Funny thing was, so all of these are well over multiple thousands of dollars, but the court also demanded that he pay back Randy Blackburn $885. So the friend that he stole the money from while he was sleeping on his couch. Because again, going back to what we said before, initially he was arrested on the suspicion of stealing over $300,000. Then it was found that he stole over $200,000 from these 4 individuals plus the 2 organizations. But then the restitution he was required to repay was only $141,000. So that, again, I couldn't find anything that could reconcile those numbers for me, but those are the numbers that are out there, is that he was required to pay much less restitution specifically to the fire department and to the Firefighters Association than what it was determined that he stole from them. So that's weird to me as well. And those are all the beats of the story that I've got. Caleb, was there anything else that you found that you'd like to add to the case before we segue into our final segment of this show?
You know, as far as victim goes, the only thing he was missing was orphans, I think.
Yeah,
the widows, you got the first responders, seniors' life savings. No,
murdering his
orphans.
Grandparents.
Yeah, murdering his grandparents, just no orphans. So I mean, he was close to the superfecta, or like, you know, the
right,
the whatever. But no orphans. But anyway, weird. That's a weird one, Greg.
It's a weird one. Yep, weird one. But I say, as weird as it is, and if you think about it too hard, it's a super bummer. But if you keep it light and keep it at a distance, it's a very entertaining story of a weirdo that stole a lot of money and did it in some real highfalutin, in some, he did it. He did it in a very James Rupert kind of way. I'm gonna say it like that. Do your clients need help with sales tax automation? Well, Avalara can help your accounting practice start or grow an existing tax compliance practice while you gain efficiencies and reduce risk for you and for your clients. Learn more about Avalara for accountants and you'll get a free gift. All you have to do is meet with an expert to explore how Avalara can help your accounting practice grow, and you'll receive a $50 gift card. Contact Avalara at accountants@avalara.com and mention the code FRAUD. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this fraud, and we're going to kind of line it up with some of the research that has been done on frauds and on fraudsters, and we're going to kind of see how this fraud compares to what we would expect from frauds, and we're just going to unpack it a little bit to see if there are any lessons to be learned, and if there are, what anything? Those lessons might be. Right.
What'd we learn? What'd we learn?
And maybe the answer's no. Maybe we didn't learn a damn thing today. But here's some points of interest, Caleb, that I found. Shoot. One of the things that's endlessly fascinating for me is red flag behaviors that fraudsters exhibit that like weren't picked up on, that maybe could have tipped people off earlier to the fact that, hey, we need to at least keep a better eye on this person. And again, the ACFE, they put out what they consider an exhaustive list of red flags. The main red flag that we see is what the new assistant fire chief heard as a rumor around town, was that James Rupert had lots and lots of debt, that he was in financial difficulty. And that is very definitely one of the red flags that the ACFE lists. As a matter of fact, it is what they list as the second most common red flag for fraud, and that 26% of all fraudsters exhibit the red flag of being in financial problem, having lots of debt, which makes it pretty clear that I mean, it's clear why that's a red flag. And it makes sense that lots of fraudsters are in that situation.
I think what's weird is it isn't the reporting that we read and the research that we did, that there isn't more to it than that. It just isn't, like in other stuff that we've talked about in other webinars and other podcasts, there's just loads of red flags. And in this case, there's just not. But I guess then that just brings up the question. I guess that raises the question for me, Greg, is that there's plenty of fraud that occurs where there's no red flags, right?
Right. Well, and interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like that is one of the most interesting parts of the red flag research that the ACFE does. So, Caleb, you're right. That's weird. I find it weird that there's a lot of fraudsters that, again, according to the ACFE, they don't exhibit any of the red flags that they list, because one of the red flags is this exactly, quote, irritability, suspiciousness, or defensiveness. And I go, find me anyone who's not irritable, suspicious, or defensive, and I am going to call bullshit, because we are all that. So.
I think that's the thing too. That I think the people at the ACFE do fine work, and the Report of the Nations is always fascinating. But there is something kind of general and very non-specific about some of these things. And we've talked about these in other discussions, but like, a wheeler dealer type. I'm like, you know how many fucking wheeler dealer types I know? More than I care to fucking think about. Okay.
Right.
Like, and especially like in CEO, it's like, oh, he was a demanding CEOs, that is a common trait of a fraudster. I'm like, are you kidding me? They're all fucking demanding. Like, and so that's the thing, is like, so much of it is circumstances and context, and maybe this is all obvious, but to me it is, things like you say, financial difficulty, the pressure that a person is under. What is it? It's kind of like Minority Report, right? If you turn the fraud triangle into some artificial intelligence, people that are experiencing pressure and have rationalization and have opportunity. Yeah. I mean, would that fucking fraud triangle robot be arresting people left and right? Probably.
It would be. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
and if it was looking, if it's looking for the red flag, because again, like you're saying, all of this stuff, because I believe how they compile the data is they go to their members and they say, how many frauds, they just ask them for a breakdown of the frauds that they investigated in that particular time period, and then they ask them for those frauds what red flags were exhibited. And I'm sure a lot of the investigators go, I didn't really know who the fraudster was, I didn't get into their personal life, so none.
Right.
And that's that, and they just leave it at that. So, but then also there's lots of subjectivity to that too, because what does financial difficulties mean? Does that mean that do I have a financial difficulty because I just went to Hawaii last week and I wasn't able to take a helicopter ride? Was that my financial difficulty in Hawaii? Right. I would like to say yes, it was. So yeah, there's a lot of subjectivity
on the other end of that spectrum, and maybe I'm belaboring the point at this point, but if financial difficulty means, well, he's living paycheck to paycheck, it's like, all right, well, you've narrowed down the suspect list to roughly 250 million people in the country.
Right. Exactly. And
So
that's
these
exactly
are the
where
things
that
where
is.
I'm just like, you
Right.
can say financial difficulty, but it
Right.
means something, but it also means very
Right.
little.
Well, and just to say that, flip it around. So that means that, if 26% of fraudsters are having financial difficulties, that means that 74% are independently wealthy. Is that
Right.
what is that what
What
that
does that
means?
mean?
So that's, yeah,
I
you
don't
can
know.
flip all of those around. So the only other red flag that I was able to find that James Rupert exhibited was past legal problems, because clearly he had past legal problems, and 5% of fraudsters exhibit the red flag of having had past legal problems. And again, to me, that was the crux of this entire case. If they knew about his past legal problems, they would have weeded him out, and he would have never had the opportunity to commit this fraud in the first place.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Now, the next thing I want to do real quick is I just want to go through the fraud triangle, and just to identify the different things that were there. And the first part of the fraud triangle, and I think the most important part of the fraud triangle is the opportunity part, because if there is no opportunity to commit fraud, then fraud will not be committed, which kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. If someone does have a criminal record, maybe hire them in positions where there is an opportunity to commit fraud, or where it's so minimal that it's immaterial. And so when I look at opportunity, the way that I unpack that is I say, so what internal controls were either missing or could be overridden by this person? And when I look at this fraud, I say all the internal controls were missing, and anything that was there clearly could have been overridden. Are you with me on that? There's no separation of duties. I didn't find any idea that there was internal audits or external audits that were created, and I'm assuming that there's not going to be, because either an internal audit or an external audit would have immediately surfaced the fact that this guy was siphoning money out of these organizations.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on this. I mean, it's a common scenario where you're in forget about small town. We're just talking about a small organization. We're talking about a volunteer fire department. We're talking about a firefighters association. They may not even have any full-time employees. Right. And the other thing that kind of happens in these small nonprofits is, like, no one wants to be responsible for the money. So when somebody steps up to be responsible for the money, everybody's like, whew, somebody's responsible for the money. Yeah. Thank God somebody's responsible for the money. And so those circumstances put these small nonprofits, and even and small businesses, as we've talked before, small organizations are just at a much higher risk, just because there's not enough people that have the sophistication or the knowledge or even the willingness to do the jobs. And I think one point that you've made on several occasions is it doesn't have to be complicated. And so I'm just curious, in your mind, what's a simple control that would have, I think I know the answer to this, but what's a simple control that could have been implemented in this situation?
I mean, to me, the basics of internal controls is the separation of duties. Is that what you thought I was going to say? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Because if you separate, nope. If you separate, and I think it's just as easy as saying you can't authorize a check and also be the person who controls the physical check itself and the reconciliation. You have to have somebody who's not James Rupert who's authorizing checks to be written. Now, that being said, his sneakiness got him around some of that by opening the secret checking account. But so then on top of that, I would have to say there's got to be some sort of just basic financial review, if not a full-blown audit of these organizations on a regular basis. Some kind of oversight that's being done. But like you said, when you get super small organizations that are volunteer in nature, that are in very, in very sparsely populated communities, because, like you said, small nonprofits, small governments, small businesses are all disproportionately affected by fraud because they just don't have the sophistication or the manpower to do these things. So it's like, it's easy to say, here's some simple internal controls that they could have put in place, but they didn't. But then you also go, it's kind of like saying good nutrition is very simple. So why don't poor people get good nutrition? It's like because they don't have the money to go to Whole Foods. That's why.
Right.
That's why they don't have the means to do that. So it's like, yeah, people know what they should do, but they can't. But their hands are tied because they just don't have the resources to do what maybe they know they should do, and maybe even what they want to do in terms of those things.
Yep.
So next, and this is pretty straightforward, the rationalization for this, we talked about it before, the apparent rationalization for this, and I think this is one of the things that weirds you out, Caleb, is the only thing that we had was his, and this is the quote that he had from his hearing. He said, "I had no intention of stealing anything permanently, only using it and replacing it, that I was not sinning, that I was not breaking any laws or rules." So he thought he was doing fine just by going, I'm just going to borrow it for a second and then give the money back. And that was his rationalization. But it seems like you want to call bullshit on him for that. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. Okay, I guess I don't like, I'm very much, I'm a church and state person when it comes to this. Like your religious, the basis for your values, if you're basing, your religious beliefs kind of inform the behavior that you're out in the world, you don't get to have it both ways. Like you can't just be like, well, the Bible says it wasn't sinning, so it ain't sinning, or it ain't wrong. There's still laws on the books that say, hey, you can't do that. You can't take money that doesn't belong to you. Even if you intend to pay it back, you can't take it if it doesn't belong to you. So I just don't know, like, if he wasn't breaking any laws or rules. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the background in ethics to like pinpoint like the school of thought that this kind of lands in, but it's a pretty clear cut case of right and wrong. It's like, if you take things that don't belong to you, then it's wrong.
Right. And again, well,
intent is bullshit. The intent is like his intent is bullshit.
Well, yeah, but I want to say that he was self-deluded. That I believe this. He really thought, like we already covered it. I think he really thought that he was going to be able to replace it. However, he justified that to himself. I think he thought he was really going to give the money back, and that's how he justified it to himself. Even if
are you asking me? Do I think his rationalization is bullshit? Or do I think that I just want to make sure that I understand, because rationalization can be bullshit, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Just the nature of, because you're rationalizing something that you rationalize the killing of your grandparents because, well, I didn't want to go to school. Felt like the right thing to do at the time was just to kill them,
kill them, or else I'd have to go to school.
Right. Yeah. So there's rationale in that. It's completely wrong and potentially psychotic. But like in this case, also to say that, well, my rationalization is that it wasn't really stealing, just temporarily taking it.
Right.
Bullshit. Right. Okay. So I just want to understand if I answered your question in the right way.
You absolutely did, because I was not splitting hairs like that. I wanted to know all of your opinions about this, and I think you laid them out. And then, the third leg of the fraud is opportunity, rationalization, and pressure. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time with pressure, because really that's just the same as red flags. Is that his lots of debt? That was his pressure. So that and really, like we even we touched on that before. It doesn't seem like there was really a whole lot else that was there. He didn't appear to be a raging alcoholic or a gambler or anything like that. Didn't seem like, he definitely didn't have shareholders to please or, or stock prices that he had to hit. So I think it was just, he was bad with money. And that's the other thing in terms of red flags. The most common red flag is living beyond your means, that he was just, he had this real, exorbitant lifestyle, and there was no indication of that. So I think this guy was just super shitty with money and was like, oh my gosh, I just spent all of our money on a car that still didn't work or something like that. I don't even know.
On giant cowboy hats.
Yeah, something. Yeah, I think he was just crappy with money, and he was just a sieve for money. So yeah, so that was the pressure. The last thing I want to talk about is detection,
Yep.
because that's always an interesting thing. Is how was it detected, and how does that line up with the research? So we broke that down when we were telling about the story. Is that he went to the new treasurer of the fire department and said, "Hey, please." It's where he was just a dumbass and was like, "Hey, I paid for $26,000 worth of equipment out of my business account. Can you just pay me back for that?" But I think ultimately, if you look at it, that ended up being a detection by a tip, because he was stupid to the new treasurer, and the treasurer then was like, "Hey, we need to look into this." And the new fire department assistant chief was also like, "Hey, this guy's in bad debt." Is that how you? That's the only way I can like classify the detection, was as a tip. Is that, are you with me on that? Or because the only thing that would line up is by accident, because he just
other
would, yeah, or other, yeah, that which is one of the categories in the ACFE is other, which you kind of go, gosh,
it doesn't feel like a tip to me, just because it was a kind of a comedy of errors, I suppose. It was just one of those things where he let something slip, either consciously or unconsciously, and and the dude's like, well, that's weird. And so they look into it, and yeah. So
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I don't.
and
That doesn't strike. I don't think they would classify that one as a tip. Again, I don't know.
Okay.
The ACFE people,
Right.
they can sure correct us if we're wrong, but
they sure could. But yeah, that's right, because it's not like, because the treasurer's the guy who investigated it, so it's not like the treasurer gave the tip to himself to go, hey, me, I just heard that this guy was doing something weird. Maybe I need to look into that. So yeah, I guess that's not a tip. So maybe it is other or by. So the ACFE says that 6% of frauds are detected by other. And maybe this is the other, and maybe just being a giant dumbass is one of the subcategories of other.
Was one method of detection by accident? Wasn't that one?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so 6%
it might fall into that then. By accident.
It might, and again, you just go, but was it an accident? This guy didn't like accidentally ask to be reimbursed. He just was like,
true.
Yeah.
No,
so
he straight up asked for, it's like, can I have 26 grand?
Yeah.
Can I have $26,000?
Yeah. So it's hard to say exactly to categorize this in terms of how it's detected. Just to give some stats real quick, 43% of all frauds are detected by tip, 6% are detected by other, 5% are detected by accident. I think it's funny that 5% of frauds are discovered by accident and only 4% of frauds are detected by the external auditor, which means that fraudsters are 1% dumber than external auditors are good at detecting fraud. So
that one, that particular fact never gets old for me.
Neither for me. And take that, auditors.
It's very satisfying.
It's very satisfying. Yeah. But also, I mean, again, in terms of best practices and what people can do, if a company does not have some sort of way for like a tip hotline or some sort of some way for people to communicate their tips to management, you get that's just a basic thing that you got to put in there to help detect frauds early enough so they don't go on for 8 years and become a $200,000 fraud, and they can be, the sooner they're found, the less damage that they do. Any other things that stick out to you about this case? And obviously, the big one that we've already hammered a lot is do background checks. I think you got to do background checks on people. Yep. Otherwise, you're gonna look horrible when it turns out that you hired a murderer.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the spirit of background checks, I think something we talked about before taping was that they are kind of an imperfect thing because of there's some thorny issues around it, and because of people that have criminal backgrounds, and it's been difficult. It's been disproportionately difficult for people of color to get back into the workforce if they've been convicted of a crime. And so acknowledging kind of the flaws within background checks and being more mindful of how you use them I think is something that everybody should do. But I think you're right. I think that it is a simple way just to check somebody out and see what's in their past.
Right. Exactly. And yeah. So I think, and again, with that, I'm a big fan of transparency. And even if that's the whole idea of, if you are an altruistic person and you're like, hey, people can turn a new leaf, people can be rehabilitated, people deserve a second chance. If that's your take on things, I think it's still necessary that if you're a person in charge of hiring, that you do background checks and that you get that out there and say, hey, we're hiring this person. They murdered their grandparents when they were 17 and we're moving forward anyways. So buckle up, County of Scotland, because this is the choice we're making. This is where we're going.
We won't be putting them in charge of the armory, and we won't be putting them in charge of the money.
Right. Or of the county nursing home. None of those things are going to be under their purview. So those are the lessons that I learned. Caleb, I think that kind of is an exhaustive look of what we learned, not of what's possible to learn from this case. Do you have anything else to add before we then wrap things up?
Nope.
Okay, that's it for this episode. Remember to always run background checks, people.
And remember to probably not hire people who murder their grandparents.
Hey, Caleb, if people want to find you out there in internet land, how can they do so?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @CNewquist and LinkedIn, my full name, Caleb Newquist. What about you, Greg?
Twitter, I'm at Greg Kite. And on LinkedIn, I'm Greg Kite CPA. I'm the bald one with glasses and a beard. So if you find that picture, you found me.
You just described most of Portland, Oregon, I think.
Right. Well, I have this. Here's a reality of being a bald guy with glasses and a beard is we're all indistinguishable. I can't tell us apart from each other. But if you find a Greg Kite with a shaved head and glasses and a beard, that's the right Greg Kite. All right. And I think that's it for this episode. Caleb, you want to read us out?
Oh My Fraud is written by Caleb Newquist and Greg Kite. Our producer is Blake Oliver. Sound design, editing, and mixing by Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave us a review and be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say, oh my fraud.
My fraud!
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you learned something new. And if you did, wouldn't it be nice to get some CPE credit for it? Well, I've got great news. My new app, Earmark CPE, offers free NASBA-approved CPE credits for listening to podcasts, including this one. Visit earmarkcpe.com to download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. That's earmarkcpe.com.